Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. We'll now move to the question and answer portion. I will begin the questioning and recognize myself for 5 minutes. So I said this in the hearing recently or in comments. The opposite sides of the aisle may not agree on the policies that brought these children to our border, but once they're in our care and we've taken responsibility for them, I think we all agree that they ought to be taken care of properly. They ought to be getting educated. They ought not be just dispersed to be labor for construction or plants where they're putting together packages of cups or vegetables, whatever it might be. As a background note, at one time in my life, I practiced in domestic relations and did child custody cases and was a guardian ad litem for children. And I went to Fort Bliss in 2021, and I started asking questions, and the answers I got were shocking. So I've been raising this issue since that time, but it doesn't seem like it's been doing any good. You have done a report now, and you've indicated that there's some preliminary things that are happening. What is HHS doing to make the vetting process of these sponsors better? Because when I was there, they basically were just checking on the internet to see if they had any violent crimes or crimes against children on their record. They weren't looking into what kind of house they were going to be in, what the sleeping arrangements were, what school they were going to, all of things which, as a guardian ad litem or somebody who was practicing in domestic relations, would have checked into for the safety of a child before I ever advised a court that I thought the child should be placed in one home or another home or wherever. So what are they doing differently now than they weren't doing in 2021? Because based on the press reports and your report, it doesn't look like much has changed.
Thank you, Chairman Griffith, for your question. We did do a report looking at Fort Bliss. We did an inspection of that site. We interviewed 66 ORR officials. We made 9 recommendations in that report. We are in receipt of the department's response to that report. If I may,
Yes, ma'am.
I will highlight 3 key areas that are of utmost importance that the department, that ORR get right. The 3 themes, and these capture findings across many of our reports, including Fort Bliss, include hiring, screening, and retaining qualified facility employees. The second has to do with robust, fully functioning electronic case management system. The third is communication internally and externally that prioritizes children's interests and concerns about potential harm to children. We're in receipt of their response to our Fort Bliss report. They are undertaking action. We consider the recommendation still open until we can examine the documentation. If you were to ask me what the number one thing they need to be working on and to do to get right, it's to completely overhaul the ORR portal before the next anticipated surge. It has not been functional for an incredibly long time, and there have been starts and stops, and they have begun again, but they need to get it right.
And when you say portals, for the folks watching back home, that's the process they use to take children who've come to the border unaccompanied and give them to some kind of a sponsor. I would hope that they would do a better background vetting, because according to the latest report from the New York Times, the administration is taking the position that once they've released them, they no longer have any responsibility. So we better be making sure we're putting them into good homes before we release them, because there were too many reports of kids not being educated, working long hours overnight. One child complained that he would really like to learn how to read, but he can't, and he's been with the sponsor now for a couple of years. It's outrageous. Are they moving in that direction? I know that it's not easy, but are they moving in that direction based on what you've seen? Or is it too early to tell?
You raise a number of different dimensions of sponsor screening. I'm going to zero in on our Fort Bliss report. We did find that the case managers were some of them were not qualified. They did not receive training. They struggled to do things like vet sponsors. We found that the case management system, the UC portal, that it frequently crashed. It didn't allow for searches of things like addresses and prior sponsors that may have housed children before. They waived certain requirements for sponsor vetting that included looking at adults that might be in the household for certain categories of sponsors. All of these things elevated risks.
Yeah.
We had recommendations for all of this. They are reporting that they're working on it. We need to review documentation to ensure they're headed in the
And we'll probably have another hearing later this year on the same subject, just to follow up, at least one, maybe two more, because I think we're all very concerned about it. And I think we've got to do better, because what we're doing is we're creating a subclass out of these unaccompanied children who can be exploited, and that's not appropriate. That's not what this was set up to do.